Well, hello sonographers everywhere and welcome to another episode. A 50mm lens is a standard part of a photographer's kit, and if, like me, you like a bit of blur in the back of a shot, you'll want one with a wide aperture too. Today we've got four f1.4 50mm lenses from the 1980s from Canon, Minolta, Chinon and Olympus. They're all widely available and they're all affordable. They'll give you some fantastic images with as much background blur as you like, and because they're vintage lenses, they'll make images with a bit of character too. So let's begin with the Minolta 50mm f1.4. This is a lovely lens and it makes some beautiful images. I've heard a lot of good things about this lens, but I've never used one before, and I was very surprised by how good it actually is. Even shooting wide open, this is a very sharp lens, and it's capable of resolving a lot of fine detail. f1.4 lenses are often a bit soft wide open, but not this one, not so you'd notice anyway. Depth of field at f1.4 is shallow, of course, especially if you're shooting close, but the in-focus areas are very detailed indeed, and stopping down a bit only makes it sharper. This lens renders colours beautifully. Colours are big, bold and bright, with as much punch as you like, and plenty of depth. There's no danger of washed out colours here, and it seems that whatever the lighting conditions, if it's bold colours you're after, this one will deliver. Despite plenty of saturation though, colours are not garish and they're always nicely balanced. To my eye, it's a very nice look indeed. Black and white's really nice too, with rich deep blacks, whites and greys, and it seems to me to have something of a filmy look in black and white. A slightly silvery sort of quality that some lenses have and some just don't. I'm glad to report this one definitely does. It's quite a contrasty lens, and it must have some very effective coatings because although it does lose contrast when shooting into the sun, it doesn't lose much. It makes some very cool flares as well. More than I expected from a 1980s lens in fact, but that's fine with me. I like a bit of sun flare, and if you stop down fully to f16 it makes some very nice sun stars too. With that f1.4 aperture there's plenty of background blur available, and the closer you are the more there is, and the blur from this lens is just delicious. At minimum focus distance the background pretty much disappears, to be replaced by a massive field of blur in which shapes and forms just melt away and nothing is recognisable. It's dreamy, it's creamy, it's soft and gentle and lovely. Like a lot of vintage lenses, background blur can get a little busy in the middle distance. It's much better than many lenses in this regard, but it is there. Blur in the far distance though is always nice, well behaved and soft. Point light sources in the frame make lots and lots of bubbles, round in the centre, and like most vintage lenses they become elliptical towards the edges. There's no swirl from this lens, just hundreds of lovely bubbles, bringing a touch of magic to a shot. This is a wonderful old lens, very well made, with very high quality glass and coatings. There are plenty still available, and they usually cost around £60 to £70, and at that price you really can't go wrong. Our next lens is the Canon 50mm f1.4 in FD mount, and in dimensions and quality of construction it's very similar to the Minolta. It's a sharp and contrasty lens that makes strong images with plenty of depth and resonance, and it must have been very much at the cutting edge in the 1980s. Colours are very nice indeed, rich, strong and vibrant, and just nicely saturated. I'd say it's a little bit nicer than the Minolta in this respect, although there isn't really very much between them, and it does really well with black and white images too. They're clean and clear, sharp and resonant, with vibrant blacks, whites and greys, and just like the Minolta, it has, to my eye, something of a filmic quality. Blacks are deep black, greys have a silvery sort of quality. There's something about the way it plays with light that just feels filmy. Shooting into the sun means contrast will drop, but due to the quality of the coatings, it doesn't drop by much. It makes some really wild flares too. The Minolta flares nicely, but this one is even better. These flares are magnificent. I know they're not everyone's cup of tea, but I think they add a unique and characterful element to an image. Background blur on the Canon is some of the nicest I've seen from any lens, as we might expect from an f1.4 lens. When shooting close, it's soft and lovely, creamy and dreamy, just beautiful. But any old lens can do that. Where this lens scores over many other vintage lenses is that it stays soft and lovely right throughout the range. Many vintage lenses have an unsweet spot where background blur becomes harsh and busy, but there's no such problem with this Canon. It's soft and smooth all the way. Point light sources create lots of beautiful bubbles that are circular in the centre, becoming slightly elliptical towards the edges, and there's none of the swirl effect that's loved by many photographers and, it must be said, hated by many others. And even though I like a bit of the swirly stuff myself, I have to say that bubbles from this lens are really quite beautiful. I'm very impressed indeed with this lens. It's very sharp, even wide open. It's got great contrast. It makes some wicked flares, and it's got some of the nicest background blur I've seen. At around £70 for a good example, that's got to be pretty good value. Our next lens is the Chinon 50mm f1.4, and I must confess this lens was quite a surprise to me. Chinon was a manufacturer of consumer-level photographic gear in the 70s and 80s. They were sold through Dixon's and they were fairly popular and sold quite well. I didn't know they'd ever sold an f1.4 lens though, so when I saw this one for sale, I was quite keen to try it out against its more costly contemporaries. It's a reasonably contrasty lens, though it doesn't have the contrast of the Minolta or the Canon. It is a little more washed out, and it doesn't cope anything like as well with light sources in the frame. It feels a bit flat, a bit lacking in depth and vibrancy. There just seems to be something lacking compared to bigger name lenses. Colour rendition though is very nice indeed. Colours are quite rich and strong, with a sort of a natural quality. They're not oversaturated or in your face. Nevertheless, they do have some vibrancy, some kick, and the lens compares very well to both the Canon and the Minolta in this respect. With black and white though, it's not quite the same story, and images don't have the same filmy sort of quality as those from the Canon and Minolta. They seem a bit flatter without the delicate and subtle shades of grey and silver. It does suffer from a bit of bloom too, which happens when a strong light source is right next to a dark area, and a hazy light bleeds from one to the other. While this can be an interesting effect, It usually isn't, and it's a main reason I wondered if this lens might be uncoated or at least poorly coated. It's possible it's got a bit of internal haze too. It's not easy to make this lens flare. It just doesn't want to do it. The best I could get out of it was this rather weedy purple splodge. And sun stars are a similar story, they just don't seem to want to emerge. The best I could do was this slightly sorry looking example shot from a reflection of the sun. There's plenty of blur on hand from this little lens, as one might expect from a 1.4, but what about its quality? Well, it's something of a mixed bag. It's very smooth if you're shooting close, unless the background is close too, and it can get rather busy and nervous at larger subject to camera distances. There's no discernible swirl from this lens, although point light sources are circular in the centre and they very quickly become elliptical towards the edges. Those ellipses don't bleed into each other in a way that would produce any of the swirly stuff. So all in all, this is an unusual little lens with some quite quirky characteristics. They seem to go for around £50 or so, but the performance, at least from this example, isn't quite on a par with lenses from some of the more major manufacturers. Finally, in this lineup, we have a lens I have used quite a bit in the past, the Olympus Zuiko 50mm f1.4. It's got some stiff competition though, so let's see how it stacks up against them. This is a very sharp and contrasty lens, even wide open, and it's at least as sharp as the other lenses in the test. Zuiko lenses, with the odd exception, are known for their strong contrast, and images made with this lens have plenty of depth and richness. It's a lens in which contrast and sharpness complement each other very nicely. It's a slightly cooler lens than the others, nevertheless colour rendition is very nice. It's not a lens that oversaturates, instead colours have a purity and a delicacy, very much their own signature look, with its own low-key sort of pop. It's laid back, it's restrained, and it's quite beautiful too. Black and white images are very nice indeed, with a richness and a crispness and a pleasing subtlety of tone, with punchy blacks and whites and delicate shades of silver. Blur from this lens is very soft and beautiful, and it gives a lovely gentle feel to an image, keeping the background free of distraction, focusing attention onto the subject. Like most vintage lenses though, it does have a spot where things get a little nervous, where the backgrounds may be 7 to 10 feet from the subject, but it's not too pronounced and it's easy to shoot around it. Point light sources create a big and beautiful field of bubbles, which seem to be a little more pronounced than those from the other lenses here. They're circular in the centre and elliptical towards the edges, although again they don't merge together to form any swirl. A lovely little lens then, small and compact with excellent image quality, and a good one will cost around £70 or thereabouts. So there we are, 4 great little lenses in a very useful focal length and a wide aperture that will give you all the background blur you could ever want. They're all well made and all are readily available, priced at around £50 to £70. So that's it from me for now. Don't forget to like, subscribe and ring the bell before you go. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zenography.